Getting people to care or lend their support to humanitarian causes around the world is difficult.
Refugees, if you're interested, that didn't work.
But it's not hard because people are heartless. Behavioral research can tell us a lot about how hard it can be to trigger empathy. As the number of people we see suffering goes up, our empathy stops increasing. It may even go down, in what psychologist Paul Slovic refers to as psychic numbing. That's because it's easier for our brain to process emotions about one person's suffering than it is for us to empathize with the larger group. Take the Syrian civil war, a high-casualty conflict where at certain points of the crisis, a powerful visual of an identified victim was able to renew public interest and spike aid donations. So a single compelling story can be effective, but only if it's able to stand out.
Volume is a huge problem. There are over 1 million images from Syria that show terrible atrocities in the civil war there. And most of us turn our eyes away. We don't want to watch them.
But images can also take their toll on us. Researchers at the University of Bradford found that exposure to violent visuals on social media can trigger symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. So you could be so emotionally burnt out from watching violent arrests on Facebook, for example, that your mind starts to shut down the part of the brain that activates empathy to protect itself. That's why the way aid groups communicate is key to getting your attention and generating empathy, something they've struggled with for years. In the 80s, humanitarian fundraising videos often focused more closely on major crises and less on individual stories.
So many children around the world still need your help.
A typical charity appeal had a depressing soundtrack and images of suffering without hearing directly from the people portrayed.
You really can't understand until you hold a child that's dying.
This approach persisted into the 2000s, in spite of getting called out for problematic cliches, like images of a helpless African child being rescued by a white savior.
A lot of people now have a predisposition towards humanitarian messaging that it's something that's going to make them feel bad. It's something that's going to make them sad.
We learned that the old ways of doing storytelling didn't work. People rejected the story, they rejected the message. They thought they were being exploited by these sort of poverty porn type images of starving children, of people in despair. So we have to find new ways of storytelling that don't just passively present people with problems, but give them ways to act.
In January, Amnesty International released a shocking ad showing Dutch residents experiencing a refugee's journey under hypnosis.
Die boot zinkt. Het gegil van de zinkende vluchtelingen is vreselijk.
The immersive world of virtual reality is a new tool more aid groups are rallying behind, and VR creators say it can spark more empathy than traditional media.
Ultimate empathy machine. It's a machine, but inside of it, it feels like real life.
The UN was the first to use VR around the Syrian conflict. In 2015, they showed their VR documentary about a Syrian refugee girl at a donor event where they nearly doubled their fundraising goal.
Novelty matters, so the first few instances of this inevitably have a much greater impact than the next 100, the next 1,000, next million. One scenario that I find VR particularly powerful for is placing people in scenarios they'll never be able to go to.
That's why this spring, Doctors Without Borders decided to take VR out on the road across the American South.
We wanted to get to communities that aren't normally reached. People see 10 VR headsets set up and they want to know what we're doing. It's able to give you such a more vivid personal experience as well as being fully submersive.
The exhibit looks at the lives of displaced people on 3 continents. Events like these help raise awareness about their medical missions.
90% of all our funding comes from individual donors. So we have to maintain a connection with the general public.
Although more humanitarian groups are investing in VR, immersion doesn't guarantee empathy or action.
It generates a very ephemeral empathy, and there's a possibility that we lapse into this kind of sort of puppet theater of watching the world in its misery. And we get that opportunity in VR and other formats of immersive media to kind of have this sort of voyeurism. And I think we have to be very cautious about that. We're starting to see this explosion of ways to think of VR and immersive media to engage people and to help them have compassion and solidarity, not just empathy, and to give them understanding and ways to act. And those are the critical elements we need in the next generation of VR.